A scarred rancher named Jack Mercer, coat torn, boots planted firm on a dusty porch under the dying sun. Three bounty hunters glare up at him, fingers twitching near their guns, ready to drag out the pregnant widow hiding behind those wooden walls. But Jack doesn't flinch. He simply says, "You tell them Elena Morales died in that desert. She's Elena Mercer now. My wife, my family." Out here, the West wasn't ruled by law, but by grit and the courage to claim what no outlaw could steal: hope. This is the story of a man who chose to stand, a woman who chose freedom over fear, and a child born under a name carved by loyalty, not chains. Stay, and you'll see why the fiercest battles are fought without a single shot. Elena Morales once wore silk ribbons in her hair and the weight of a silver locket pressed against her chest. Now that same locket clinks against the swell of her belly as she slips out the warped back door of a saloon that smells like stale sweat and broken promises. Midnight drips down the warped sign outside, letters half scraped off. Lobo's last chance. But there are no chances left here for a pregnant widow whose name still clings to the lips of outlaws like a curse. She keeps her head low under a battered hat. The wind hisses through gaps in the boards, carrying laughter from men who'd sell their own mothers for a bottle of cheap whiskey. She'd once thought Javier's name would keep her safe. Now that name is the bounty on her back. Javier Morales, the bandit king of Peñasco, shot dead in a canyon. The gold he stole, gone. And every man who rode under his flag now believes Elena knows exactly where it sleeps. She bribes the stable boy with the last of her silver coins, coins she'd sewn into her cloak the night Javier never came home. He hands her the reins to a half-starved mule with ribs sharp enough to cut her palms. But it walks, and that's enough. She murmurs thanks she doesn't feel and mounts clumsily, her belly throwing her off balance. A constant reminder that the last living piece of her husband is the very reason men would slit her throat open in a heartbeat. The desert opens its arms to her like a grave that forgot how to close. Out here, the land cuts like a blade. Mesquite brush tangles her skirt. The wind wails like a coyote hungry for bone. Every mile is a bargain struck in silence. Freedom bought with fear. She rides west, chasing the memory of a place where no one knows the Morales name. The frontier towns she passes sleep like drunks on a Sunday. Their streets sag under the weight of old lies. She remembers how these border saloons are kingdoms of illusion, where cowards wear borrowed spurs and girls trade their last ounce of hope for a bottle and a broken promise. In rooms like that, Elena once sat with her back to the wall, watching Javier play king, his smile all teeth and threat. She knows now he built their freedom on sand and stolen bullets. The mule stumbles, jarring her spine, and she swallows a groan. The baby kicks. She presses a hand to her belly, her palm rough and trembling. "You promised we'd be free, Javier. I believed you. Now I ride alone with your ghost inside me and the men you left behind on my trail. No more graves tonight. Not for me. Not for this child." Moonlight spills silver over dry gullies and hard dirt ruts. In the distance, she can almost hear horses. Or maybe it's just the wind. She remembers what her neighbor, old Widow Harlan, once whispered when they huddled behind a barn door during a spring storm. "A woman's worth isn't in the gold he leaves behind, child. It's in what she can hold when the snow comes. My Henry died before he finished that north fence, and I held it myself. 3 winters, 2 raids. Shot a drifter from my porch when he came for my hogs. Buried him behind the smokehouse with a shovel older than my wedding band. Nobody took this place from me. Not even death." Elena bites back a laugh that comes out more like a sob. "God, if I had Widow Harlan's spine, these men wouldn't chase me like a fox down a canyon." She grips the reins tighter, leans into the cold desert wind as it cuts through her ragged cloak. Somewhere out there, a safe place waits. A porch without shadows. A name not poisoned by stolen gold. She doesn't know what it looks like yet, but she knows this. She'll keep riding until the last outlaw's promise fades behind her, and she'll build her worth with every mile, every heartbeat under her ribs. Proof that sometimes grit, not gold, is all a woman needs to survive. Elena didn't remember falling, didn't remember the moment when the horizon spun like a coin on a table, or when the mule beneath her stumbled and she slid sideways, arms too weak to brace the ground. The desert swallowed her prayers the way it swallowed bones. No echo, no mercy, just the hush of sand under a bruised sky. When her eyes flickered open, it was to the warmth of cedar smoke and the creak of an old rocking chair. Her vision blurred again, but the air smelled of saddle oil and dry wood, not blood. For a heartbeat, she thought she'd crossed over to whatever lay past the final sunrise, until the ache in her ribs reminded her she was still stitched to this world by pain and a heartbeat that fluttered under her ribs like a caged bird. A patch blanket lay heavy across her shoulders. Her boots, split at the seams, crusted with dust, sat neatly beside a small iron stove. Next to them, her knife rested on a three-legged stool within arm's reach. Not hidden, not stolen, offered. It was the first thing that told her she hadn't traded one prison for another. She forced herself to sit up, hands pressing to the curve of her belly. The baby answered her with a slow, stubborn kick. "Still here, little one," she whispered hoarsely. "We're still here." Across the room, a man sat with his back to the door. He moved slowly, wrapping new leather around a battered bridle. Fingers steady despite the tremor she could almost see under the grime of hard work. His coat hung from a nail by the door, the sleeve ragged where it had been torn and roughly stitched. His beard was peppered with gray, and when he shifted, she glimpsed the scar that carved a pale path from under his jaw to the edge of his ear, a mark like a half-told story. He must have heard her stir, but he didn't turn right away. He tied off the last knot in the leather and set the tack aside with the care of a man who knew how much it cost to lose something once built by hand. When he finally faced her, his eyes were pale as an old storm. They didn't hold pity, and they didn't look away. He didn't see a problem or prey. He saw a woman in his bunkhouse who hadn't asked to be saved, but needed saving all the same. "You're awake," he said simply, voice low, rough as unpolished oak. Elena swallowed past the grit in her throat. Where am I?" "Half a mile from dead, last I checked." He pushed himself up from the chair, joints popping like old fence posts in a thaw. He poured water from a dented kettle into a tin cup and handed it to her, careful not to touch her hand. "Found you by my north trail. Mule was worse off than you, but I reckon it still has more fight left than most men I know." She drank. The water tasted of tin and smoke and life. "You didn't ask who I was." "Didn't seem polite," he said. A hint of a smile tugged at the corner of his mouth but never reached his eyes. "You always drag half-dead strangers into your bunkhouse?" He shrugged, big shoulders rolling under a frayed shirt. "A woman ready to give birth alone in the desert? Trouble finds its own kind, miss." She hesitated, the name Morales caught between her teeth like a fishhook. "Elena," she said at last. "Just Elena." He nodded once, like that was all he needed. "Jack Mercer." Silence settled between them, not cold, but not comfortable either. She wanted to ask what the scar meant, where the pain came from, but knew better. Out here, people's worst stories were the ones they didn't have to tell. He gestured at the door with his chin. "I've got fence line to mend. Mabel'll stop by. She'll see you fed. You need anything, you holler." He paused at the threshold, then added, "Knife stays close. I figured you'd want it that way." After he was gone, the quiet pressed in like an old quilt, heavy but warm. Elena stared at the rough-hewn beams, the threadbare quilt, the battered stove. It wasn't a palace, but it was more shelter than she dared hope for when she bribed that stable boy. A soft knock at the door startled her. An older woman bustled in with a basket balanced on one hip and a sharp smile that made her eyes crinkle like paper. "Don't you jump, girl. I'm no ghost," the woman said, setting the basket down. She began unpacking it. Bread wrapped in cloth, butter in a crock, coffee beans in a tin that rattled like pebbles in a river. "Name's Mabel Holloway. I run the orchard yonder. Jack told me you might need some company that don't hammer nails for a living." Elena tried to stand, but Mabel waved her back. "Don't you dare. Sit, eat. Save your strength for that little one. Trust." She poured 2 cups of coffee, black as midnight, steam curling between them. "Trust ain't a gift, girl. It's built one coffee cup at a time. And lucky for you, I've got plenty of beans." Elena looked at the older woman's hands, cracked at the knuckles but steady as bedrock. The smell of fresh bread made her stomach twist with hunger she hadn't let herself feel in weeks. And for the first time since she'd slipped into that moonless desert, she let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, she wouldn't have to run tomorrow. And maybe trust, like bread, could rise again, even on land that only knew how to bury the broken. Rumors find Elena Morales faster than Mercy ever could. Word travels down dusty fence lines, carried by ranch hands who talk more than they work, by traveling peddlers who trade gossip for whiskey, by the eyes that linger too long on a woman who wants nothing more than to disappear. It starts with a new ranch hand, lean, sunburnt, a boy with a grin that slithers sideways when he thinks no one's looking. Elena feels him watching her from the corner of the paddock when she gathers eggs, the weight of his stare pressing into the small of her back like a cold finger. One morning she catches him too close by the well. His boots scuff the dry dirt as he tips his hat, eyes dropping to the curve of her belly. He licks his cracked lips, half a smile bleeding across his face. "Heavy burden, ma'am," he drawls. "Big news when a woman carries that much alone." She says nothing. She just grips the well's handle tighter, palms rough on the worn wood, and pulls up the bucket. The rope squeaks. The boy's eyes narrow like a rattler about to strike, but Elena doesn't flinch. She spent too long learning how to stand the stone still when danger tries to coil around her feet. That night, the bunkhouse walls feel too thin. Whispers crawl through the cracks like smoke from an old fire. Words hissed when they think she sleeps. Outlaw's widow, gold still missing, Morales. She lies awake, hand on her belly, thumb tracing the shape of the locket tucked under her nightgown. She wonders if ghosts can smile, if Javier's ghost laughs at her now, still running, still hunted. So she does the only thing she knows. She packs her satchel in the dark. Coins stitched into the hem, letters folded tight, the knife tucked into her boot. She leads the mule out under a bruised slice of moon, the animal's ribs pressed like fence rails under her palm as she fastens the saddle's tired straps. The desert stretches out before her like an open mouth. She's seen those teeth before, gullies like claws, wind sharp enough to cut a soul to ribbons. She looks back at the bunkhouse light. Jack's lantern flickers through the window. His boots rest by the porch, the rifle leaned within reach. She can almost hear his voice. You run, you bleed alone. You stay, you don't. Elena presses her forehead to the mule's neck, hot tears gathering at the corners of her eyes. No more running, she tells herself. Not with this child, not with a man who stands when others run. She turns the mule back to its pen, unties the rope with trembling fingers. She walks inside the bunkhouse before the night can change her mind. Days pass. The air grows heavy with talk. It's only a matter of time before word of the Morales widow reaches the wrong ears. And trouble never knocks politely. They come just as the sun begins to slide behind the western ridge. 3 men, dressed in black dusters that flap like crow wings in the rising wind. Horses lean and mean, hooves churning up the yard's hard earth. Elena sees them first from the kitchen window, a dish rag clenched in her hands until it's wet with fear. Jack Mercer stands on the porch, his coat unbuttoned, boots planted like they're nailed to the boards. The scar under his beard catches the last gold threads of daylight, a mark that says he's seen worse men than these and buried most of them. The leader swings down first, tall, sharp-eyed, a grin like a rusted blade. "Evening," he drawls, tipping his hat like a man who's tasted power and wants more. "Heard you've been harboring a fugitive, old man. Morales woman, outlaw's whore. She's got something that don't belong to her." Jack doesn't move, doesn't spit, doesn't reach for the rifle yet. His voice is calm, but it scrapes the air raw. "Ain't no Morales here. Funny. Folks say otherwise. Word is she's carrying more than just a baby. Where's that gold, huh?" The man's hand drifts low to his holster. His partners shift in their saddles like wolves scenting blood. From behind the door, Elena presses her palm to the wood, her heartbeat a drum so loud she wonders if Jack can hear it too. He doesn't turn, but she sees the way his shoulders square up like a wall. Jack shifts his weight, boots creaking against the porch boards. He locks eyes with the bounty hunter, lets him see the storm behind his scar. She's not prey, he growls, voice low enough to bury a man in his boots. She's my family. Try to take her. See who bleeds first. The yard holds its breath. The sun slips behind the hill, and for one long heartbeat, it's just the hush of wind through the sage and the promise of bones for the buzzards. Trouble came to claim her again. But this time, Elena doesn't run. This time, she's got a name worth staying for. When the first pain struck her, Elena Morales pressed her hand to the swell of her belly and knew the storm she'd been running from had finally come for her, but not in the way she feared. This was not men on horseback with pistols and hungry eyes. This was older than any outlaw, older than any name. This was life, raw and clawing its way into a world that had tried so hard to bury it. She lay on the narrow bunkhouse bed, the coarse quilt twisted in her fists, sweat trickling down her temples and soaking her hairline. Each contraction tore through her like a cattle brand, searing hot against her ribs. Her vision blurred with each wave of pain, but she didn't dare close her eyes for long, afraid that if she did, she'd wake in that desert again, alone. Outside, dusk faded into the black hush of a moonless night. The wind rattled the latch. Beyond the thin wooden walls, Jack Mercer's boots whispered back and forth across the porch boards, each step a wordless promise that she would not be left to face this alone, even if the labor itself was hers to bear. He kept his rifle propped against the doorframe like a quiet warning to any man who might think to cross the yard tonight. Inside, Mabel Holloway sat beside Elena with a basin of water, her hands firm but gentle, her voice a steady river cutting through the rough land of Elena's fear. Breathe, girl. You hold tight to the edges of this world and don't let go. He's almost here. Sometimes the pain faded into a haze, a strange calm where Elena's mind wandered, back to the old tales she'd heard by firelight about women birthing babies in dugouts and half-finished barns, cold wind cutting through broken boards while men rode the fence line to keep coyotes and worse things away. Across the West, she thought, women birthed their children in sod houses, wagons stuck in mud, barns left to rot. They brought life into the harshest corners of the earth, because hope doesn't care where it's born. My screams tonight, they echo 1,000 others. But this birth, this child, it's not just his. It's mine too. My name, my life, my choosing. A fresh wave of pain pulled her from memory. She bit back a scream, lips pressed hard to Mabel's shoulder, tears burning the corners of her eyes. Mabel stroked her hair, humming a low, wordless tune that might have been a prayer or just a comfort passed down from mothers long forgotten. On the porch, Jack paused, boots silent for a heartbeat. He looked up at the blank sky, the scar beneath his beard catching the soft lantern glow spilling from the bunkhouse window. He'd seen blood before, too much of it on battlefields and in burned-out homesteads. But this was different. There was no enemy to aim at, no threat to scare off with a loaded gun. This was a fight only she could finish. Inside, time bent. It became a cycle of ragged breaths and the taste of salt on her tongue. When the final push came, it felt like breaking and mending at the same time. A single raw cry split the silence. High, fierce, alive. Elena collapsed back onto the pillows, chest heaving. Her hair clung to her cheeks, her fingers cramped from gripping the quilt so tight her knuckles had gone bloodless. She half feared the room would fade again. But then Mabel pressed something warm and new into her arms. A boy, red-faced and squalling, lungs greedy for the breath of a world that would not have him so easily. Strong, Mabel said, voice thick with wonder. Strong like his mama. Elena stared at him, her son, his fists balled tight like he was ready to fight the dust and lies that had chased her this far. She felt something inside her, a knot she'd carried for too long, loosen and slip away. And there, at the foot of the bed, sat a small cedar horse. Its legs were thick, its mane carved rough, but its eyes seemed to look forward, not back. On its base, etched with a hand unsteady but certain, was a name. Isaac Mercer, not Morales, not the son of a bandit's ghost. This was her boy, born in sweat and pain but carried forward on a name built with trust, not fear. The first honest piece of freedom she could hold in her arms. Outside, Jack's boots shifted again. He did not knock. He did not step inside yet. But the rifle stayed leaning by the door, and the lantern stayed burning. Proof that sometimes a man can stand guard over more than land and fences. He can stand guard over the chance for someone to begin again. The first thaw came late that year. Snow melted slow in the gullies, feeding the creek that cut past Jack Mercer's fences like a vein through dry skin. Spring brushed the land with hesitant green, and with it, the neighbors' whispers shifted, softened. At first, they'd watch the young widow with her haunted eyes and growing belly like she was a storm just waiting to wreck the ridge. Now they watched her stand barefoot on the porch at dawn, planting lavender and rose that hummed with bees by midsummer. It wasn't a grand house. The bunkhouse never grew walls of brick or shingles painted white like the homes of the ranch barons farther west. But it grew steady. One nailed plank, one patch of mended fence, one pair of small boots left muddy at the step. What it had now was laughter, and that was worth more than any polish. The old schoolhouse reopened in late August, its windows scrubbed clean for the first time in years. Elena scrubbed them herself, fingers raw but proud. Mabel Holloway lent her a crate of battered books and an old slate, the chalk dust swirling like smoke in the pale morning light. Children's voices filled the cracked floorboards again, bouncing off the walls like a promise that there was more to this land than guns and graves. Isaac toddled through the garden in the early evenings, fists full of weeds he believed were flowers. He trailed behind Jack like a shadow made of giggles, tugging at the hem of his coat, yanking on the old man's peppered beard until Jack pretended to roar like a bear just to see the boy squeal. There were nights when the wind rattled the windows, and for a moment, Elena's old fear would crawl up her spine like a cold hand. But then she'd hear Jack's boots crossing the porch, steady as ever, his lantern burning through the dusk. A signal that she wasn't alone, not anymore. Some folks in town still spit the name Morales under their breath. They'd tip their hats to Jack, but their eyes would flick to Elena like she was a ghost they weren't sure deserved to stay. She'd meet their glances head on, her spine straight, her hands firm around Isaac's shoulders. Let them whisper. She knew the truth of who she was now, and no bounty, no blood debt could buy it back. One evening, when the last sun dipped low behind the cottonwoods, Elena sat on the porch steps, Isaac asleep in her lap. She watched the lavender sway in the warm breeze, bees humming secrets she didn't need to know. Jack sat beside her, carving a new piece of cedar, maybe another horse, maybe something else altogether. He didn't ask her to explain the shadows that sometimes crossed her face. He just let them pass, the same way dusk turns into night without apology. "Do you think folks will always talk?" Elena asked him once, eyes half closed against the soft dark. Jack paused, his whittling thumb brushing a rough edge smooth. "Maybe," he said, "but they'll get tired, and when they do, we'll still be here. Same as now, same as tomorrow." And she believed him, because the truth was never in the vow. It was in the quiet staying. She had not been rescued like a damsel from a dime novel, carried off into the sunset by a man with more bullets than sense. She had chosen this life, brick by stubborn brick. She had chosen Jack, chosen Isaac, chosen her own name, signed with the same hands that once held a pistol under her pillow. If anyone asked, Elena Morales would still answer, "That woman died in the desert." What rose from those dry bones was someone freer than any outlaw's widow, stronger than the chains men tried to wrap around her. She had tasted what it meant to be hunted and what it meant to be sheltered. But the real lesson lay in the choice she made when both doors stood open. Some freedoms aren't given. They're claimed over and over again, in sweat, in sleepless nights, in the stubborn planting of lavender on soil that once knew only blood. And out here, under a sky wide enough to hold every secret and every scar, Elena finally learned, sometimes staying is the bravest ride of all. Sometimes the West feels like a place that's gone, buried under highways and neon lights. But stories like Elena and Jack's remind us that some truths never die. They just wait for a good soul to carry them forward. Maybe you've never had to stand on a porch with a rifle to protect the ones you love. But every day, in small, quiet ways, we fight our own battles to choose what stays, what leaves, and what grows. In a world that often tries to tell us who we are, by the family we come from, the mistakes we've made, Freedom is still something we claim with our own hands. Out here, under this big American sky, we're all still learning what it means to build trust, one coffee cup at a time. Erin, maybe you see it in your neighbor who brings over fresh bread when you're low, or in the grandfather who plants lavender to remind his family that beauty can grow where only weeds once took root. Elena's lesson is simple but timeless. The life we choose is worth more than any name someone else tries to write for us. Staying is not weakness, it's courage. So tell me in the comments, what part of this story touched you most? Do you believe that freedom today is still something you have to choose, not just expect? Have you ever stood your ground for someone when it would have been easier to walk away? Thank you for riding with us through this tale of grit, grace, and second chances. If you'd like more stories like this, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe, and share your thoughts below. After all, legends stay alive only when good folks keep telling them.